On this video, I would like to do a reading of the Greek text with a grammatical analysis and a running commentary on chapter 12, verses 1 to 6. So we begin, we've worked our way up to this point in our grammatical analysis of Revelation with commentary. We now come to the woman and the dragon. And the dragon will represent Satan. This is clearly uh, talked about by John in verse 9, where it speaks of the dragon as the old serpent who is called the devil and Satan. So that is the dragon that attacks the woman. The woman, as we'll see, has been variously interpreted. I appreciate Metzger's brief summary on this, that John is probably thinking of a personification of the ideal community of God's people. First, in its Jewish form, in which Mary gave birth to Jesus, the Messiah, and also thinking of the Jewish people, nation, the righteous nation, the remnant of the that had a part in bringing forth uh, Mary, the birthing of Mary, and so forth, and Joseph. And then in the Christian form, the woman continues to be the persecuted church that is persecuted by the political power of the Roman Empire, especially under Domitian. And really, we could apply it then ultimately through time. But we are at verse 74 of Breaking the Code. I was just reading a summary of that particular idea. So I'm picking it up at verse 1. Kai semean mega ophthe into urano, gune, peribeblemene tan helion, kai he selene hupakato ton padon autes, kai epites kephales autes, Stephanas esteron dodeca. That is, and there was a great sign was seen in the heaven. A woman, having been clothed with the sun, and the moon was under her feet, and upon her head was a crown of 12 stars. So looking at some of the grammar, the verb of the is from harao. It is the aorist indicative passive third person singular from harao, was seen. A sign was seen in heaven, a great sign. A woman, peribeblemene, having been clothed with the sun. Peribeblemene is from peribalo. We have the perfect passive participle, nominative feminine singular from peribalo. So a woman having been clothed with the sun, and the moon was under her feet, and upon her head were 12 stars. And as I said, we look at possibly Israel here that will be giving birth to the Messiah coming out of Israel. And the 12 stars could possibly look at the 12 tribes of Israel. And then we move on. Kai en gastri ekusa, kai kradze odenusa, kai basinet samene teken. That is, and in literally having in the stomach or being pregnant, and she is crying in labor, being in pain to bear. And we're looking at the birth of Jesus. literally having in the stomach, which is an idiomatic way of saying being pregnant. Ekusa is your present active participle, nominative feminine singular from echo, and she is crying. Kradzo is the root, present indicative active third person singular from kradzo, uh, in labor or being in labor, from odeno, to be in labor, another present participle, active participle, nominative feminine singular from odeno, and in pain. Basanitsamene. Uh, Here we have a participle, a present passive participle, nominative feminine singular from basanidzo. So being in pain, tekain, to bear. And this is from tikdo, to bear, aorist active infinitive from tikdo. So we're looking at the birth of Jesus, and notice the image or the sign John sees moves on to a fiery red dragon. Kaiophthe ala semeon into urano, kayadu dragon, megas, puras, ekon, kephalas hepta, kai kerata deca, kai epitas kephalas autu, hepta dia demata. That is, and another sign was seen in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, picturing his, say, wisdom and his intelligence, I guess we could say, and his power, having 10 horns, and upon his head 7 diadems or crowns, looking at his sovereign power, evil power, but looking at, I should say, not sovereign power, but looking at his power. God is the one who is sovereign in power. Uh, so again, looking at the grammar, ophthe is your aorist indicative passive third person singular from charao. And there was seen another great sign in the heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having ekon is your present participle, active participle, nominative masculine singular from echo, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his head 7 diadems. So we're picturing here Satan, and this will be defined, as we said, in verse 9, where it speaks of the great dragon as as the serpent, Af is archeas, that old serpent, kalumenas diabala, one being called the devil, and satanas, Satan. So it's clear John has defined who the red dragon is. And then notice in verse 4, it continues, Kache ura autu, sure ta pitan, ton asteron tu uranu, kai ebalen autus estain game, kai hadragon, heste ken enopion tes gunaikas tes meluses tekain, hena hatan teke ta teknon altes, kata phage. That is, and his tail, the dragon's tail, is sweeping the third of the stars of heaven and cast them unto the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to bear, in order that whenever she bears her child, he might devour it. And so the tail is drawing, sure is your present indicative active third person singular from suro, is drawing the third of the stars, and many understand the stars to possibly be angelic beings, and cast them, Ebalon, unto the earth. Ebalon is from Balo, indicative active third person singular from Balo. Cast them to the earth, and the dragon stood, Hestekin is your aorist indicative active third person singular from histemi, before the woman who was about to bear. Tes meluses is the participle, the genitive participle, present participle, genitive feminine singular from Melo, who was about to tekane, to bear from tikdo. Again, aorist active infinitive from tikdo, in order that whenever she should bear, tekke is the aorist subjunctive, third person singular, third feminine singular from tikdo, that whenever she should bear her child, he might devour it. Kataphage is from katestheo, to eat or to devour, aorist indicative active third person singular. That is, that the serpent, Satan, is seeking to devour the woman. And this is no doubt possibly referring back to Matthew 2 and to Herod and what Herod tried to do in destroying Christ by attacking those 2 years of age and down in Matthew 2. And probably John has that in mind, most feel. And then it goes on, Kai etekin huarsen has mele poimanen panta ta ethne in hrabdo sidera kai herpaste ta teknon altes prastantaan kai prastan thranan al2. That is, and she bore a male child who is about to shepherd all the nation with an iron rod, and he was snatched, the child was snatched, or her child was snatched to God and to his throne. Here we're looking at the ascension of Christ. And notice she bore a male child. That is, coming out of the ideal Israel, and we could also apply it to Mary, coming out of Israel. She bore, etekin is your aorist indicative active third person singular from, again, tikdo. She bore a male child who is about, mele, your present indicative active third person singular from melo, who is about to shepherd all the nations with an iron rod. Poimanen is your present active from poimino. And we're going back to Psalm 2, where Jesus is to shepherd the nations with an iron scepter. Psalm 2, verse 9. And notice, as he's about to do that, as the Messiah, he was snatched up, herpaste ta tekna altes, that is, and he was snatched up from harpazo. It's the aorist indicative passive third person singular from harpazo. Her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. So we're looking at the ascension of Christ. And the attack of the dragon, Satan, both through Herod and the final cross work of Jesus, where actually he defeated death and Satan and sin. All of that was an attack by the dragon, but Jesus was victorious. And after that victorious victory, he snatched up into God's presence, into the Father's presence, and to his throne. And then the woman, Kaihegune, Efugen Estain Ereman Hapueke Eke Tapan Hetoimas Menon Apatutheu Hena Eke Trefosin Altain Hemeras Kilias Dias Kamsias Ekanta. That is, and the woman fled into the desert, where she is having there a place, having been prepared from God, in order that there they might feed her 1,260 days. Notice here, the woman fled. Efugen is from fugo, the aorist indicative active third person singular, into the desert. Again, it's looking at an escape. There might be a reference back to a historical reference of a similar thing that took place in Petra, some feel, on the part of Israel fleeing, but at another time. But it's looking, no doubt, at the persecution of the church that continued. The woman being a personification not only of Israel, but of the spiritual Israel, or of the church itself. So the mission was actually his attack against the woman, against the church. And this would be meaningful to John's readers, where he is having there a place having been prepared. Hetoi mas menon is from hatoi mazo. It's the perfect passive participle from hatoi mazo, to a place having been prepared, accusative singular. So it's looking at God's protection, and there they might feed her. Trefosin is your subjunctive from trefo, the present subjunctive third person plural, that they might feed her 1,260 days, which we've seen that before. That is the 3.5 years. Now, some apply this to the future. Some interpreters, that Israel being persecuted by the future beast or antichrist, that is referring to the 3.5 years of the 7-year tribulation period. Others understand this to have reference to what was going on in the first century among the persecution of believers in the spiritual Israel. And basically, they are going to be they're running, and yet are going to be protected by the Lord. And the 3.5 years, many or some say, could refer to Antiochus Epiphanes as a model or a type, because he persecuted Israel, remember, under his attack in the intertestamental period for 3.5 years. And he becomes like a model or a type of persecution. And John could be referring to that, applying it then to his readers who are going through a similar period. And God is promised to try to, or not to try, but to protect them and nourish them during this time. It could also be applied, some interpreters would say, not only to that period historically, but through the history of the church, and using that figure, 3.5 years, as, can I say, a model of persecution, of what Antiochus Epiphanes being applied now to the Christian church, the woman that continues to be persecuted until the Lord finally returns. And so those are some of the different interpretations. As I've said before, the book of Revelation has a variety of interpretations among scholars. And even if one knows Greek, they can still vary in their interpretation. So I'm just sharing all of the different ways that this has been approached. The good news is Christ is the victor. He is at the right hand of the Father, and we can be assured that Satan is going to be defeated. And that's what we'll move on to see in the next section of this chapter, in chapter 7 and following. The kingdom of God is now seen in the victory of Christ and his sacrifice, which he has fulfilled.